Well, thank you, Nina. Thank you, Anne. And thank you all for coming. So I hope we'll have a fun evening tonight. My plan is to have the talk like 45 minutes. And I leave like 15 minutes for you to ask questions, or if you like me to elaborate on things that I mentioned. So that's the plan today. And after an introduction, I will be focusing on these issues. The date palm, tree of life, I'm going to choose an ingredient, prepared foods, and technique, just to explore this presentation today. So the date palm, tree of life, ingredient, bread, prepared food, Klecha cookies, also typical Iraqi cookies. Mazgoof, this is a fish dish. Stew, this is a technique of preparing foods. Counterfeit dishes, you'll know what they are later on. Cuisine of intrigue and showmanship, these are also about techniques and cooking. So these are the issues I'm going to cover tonight. But first of all, I'll have a kind of introductory this is an introductory part. Food is a key component of our culture. It's essential for our survival, true, but it is far more significant than just our survival. Its centrality in human socialization shows in our sense of identity, and hence the claims that we are or are not what we eat. Unfortunately, food as identity can create a disadvantage under certain circumstances. There is a reason, for instance, why an Iraqi owner of a restaurant somewhere in the US vaguely called his franchise Mediterranean rather than Iraqi or Middle Eastern. His explanation, as reported in a newspaper, was that he did not want to scare people away with a name with possible negative associations, which is a pity. I remember from several years ago a mock interview with an ex-presidential candidate, Michelle Bachmann, who was controversial for promoting Islamophobic ideas. In this interview, Bachmann was asked why falafel should not be served in lunches for elementary schools, to which he responded that falafel is a gateway food. It starts with falafel. Then the kids move on to shawarma. And after a while, they say, hey, this tastes good. I wonder what else comes from Arabia. So there is truth in this mockery, of course. And it can be used constructively in building bridges between cultures and in promoting common grounds for understanding the other. This, in fact, is what I have been doing with my book, with my presentations, with my talks and classes, cooking classes, and what the Iraqi-American artist Michael Rakowitz did in his mobile food truck, Enemy Kitchen. In addition to his project, The Invisible Enemy Should Not Exist, which Nina has just mentioned. Some of his works are on display in this museum. Okay. And for this project, he recreated replicas of ancient Mesopotamian monuments that were looted or destroyed by ISIS. These are the monuments before destruction, and this is what remained of them. So he tried, in a way, to recreate them. I remember I lived 11 years in Mosul, where the Nimrud is, the place is, and it was a favorite a picnic place for us. We used to go there, take pictures. So it was really a lovely place, so unfortunately. For the winged bull at Trafalgar Square in London, he used empty cans of Iraqi date syrups as material. The dates and date palms have also been casualties of ongoing wars and date syrup and troubles in Iraq. So Here you have scenes from past and present. Back in ancient times, they also used to destroy those beautiful trees. And this is what remains of most of the date palms after all those troubles. And for the replicated wall steels of King Ashur-nasir-pal II Northwest Palace in Kalhu, the limestone reliefs that once lined the walls of the palaces, Rakowitz used paper wrappers of food and scraps of Arabic newspapers of the Middle Eastern diaspora in the Middle East. These are close-ups of what he used. These scraps nostalgically evoke in me a whole world with all its charms, complexities, conflicts, and anxieties. From a restaurant ad showcasing the luxurious stuffed sheep with the familiar greeting, ahlan wa sahlan, to the sticky sweets of baklava and burma, and the festive ma'moul cookies. There is mention of Islam, olive oil, Trump, ads for home equity loans, Al Jazeera, falafel, Jerusalem food, Fairuz, the famous Lebanese singer, and so on. All these things you can read in those scraps. A macrocosm, you might say, of a diaspora adopting and adapting, but at the same time clinging to its inherent traditions and customs and pride. And I thought, how fitting that the medium of food in the form of these wrappers and newspaper scraps should indeed be used for coating these replicas of the lost artifacts. Because as it happens, one of the many steels that lined walls of the Northwest Palace was inscribed with an account of a magnificent feast. This famous stele, known as the Banquet stela, was discovered in the ruins of Kalhu, Nimrud, the same place to which belonged the originals of the steels displayed here in this museum and elsewhere. It was found at its original position, erected near the doorway leading to the throne room. It was discovered in 1995 and kept at the Mosul Museum where Nineveh and Nimrud are located. It was originally set up to celebrate the inauguration of Ashur-nasir-pal II new state capital of Assyria, Kalhu, in the early 9th century BC. This is an imagined image of the city when it was in its glory. Now something about this feast. In the account inscribed on the Banquet stela, a lengthy report, or actually more of an inventory, is given of the huge amounts of myriads of foods offered to close to 70,000 guests. The list included meat, of meat, you have barley-fed oxen, you have sheep, lamb, deer, gazelles, geese, fowls, small birds, fishes, locusts, assorted eggs, breads measured by tables, beer in jars, wine in skins, and miscellanies like sesame seeds, roasted barley, pistachio nuts, figs, dates, eggplants, you name it. The account concludes with the king's announcement. 69,574 guests, including those summoned from all lands and the people of Kalah. For 10 days, I gave them food. I gave them drink. I had them bathed. I had them anointed. Thus did I honor them and send them back to their lands in peace and joy. These are the ingredients or the inventory of his feast. And these are scenes of the things, how the procession of the servers when they go and serve such feasts. And you notice to the left, that there is a skewer in which you have locusts These are grilled locusts. They were a delicacy back then. So, and the other image, which shows they are carrying fruits. Okay, now we talked about the feast, and let's come talk a little bit about the land itself. The varieties of foods included in Ashur Nasrallah's banquet do indeed impressively display a well-stocked land based on agriculture, which has been at the center of life in Mesopotamia from ancient times. In the middle and south of the region, where rain was not enough, the land had to be irrigated by digging networks, canals, and using simple bucket-shaped water-lifting machines called dalu. Okay, this is the simple machine they use to lift water from lower places to higher places. In Upper Mesopotamia, where rain is plentiful, wheat prospered, while the hardier barley grew abundantly in the south. Commenting on the excellent quality of grains that he saw growing in the land between the two rivers, 5th century historian Herodotus said, "Of all the countries that we knew, there is none which is so fruitful in grain. The blade of the wheat plant and barley plant is often 4 fingers in width." Other important field crops, they were like sesame seeds, chickpeas, and lentils. Generally, the Mesopotamians had small vegetable gardens attached to their houses in addition to the fields where they worked for a living. In these gardens, they grew vegetables, and some of them those names I find it's amazing how the Arabic borrowed so many words from the ancient Akkadian. Leaf vegetables like lettuce, it was called khassu, which in Arabic we call khas. For example, chard, silky, we call silk, and and other, a lot of vegetables, and beets, for example, and they grew turnips, radishes, herbs, a lot of herbs, mint, rue, dill, and some of the seasoning, of course, plants, they like garlic, onion, and they used a special herb called karasu, which is korath, which is, we still use it nowadays. It was ubiquitous in the medieval times. Karasu is like leeks, but they grow it not for the bulbs, they grow it for the leaves only. So they are very delicate leaves. And they didn't only depend on the things they grow, they also depended on things that grow naturally. In the desert, for example, the truffles, and they were a delicacy. There is a letter which says, "Rain has settled, and truffles are grown all over. I'm sending my lord truffles and 2 ostrich eggs." He's doing him a favor. Okay, they also used a lot of aromatics and seasoning spices like coriander. For example, they called it kuzibaru. In Arabic, it is kuzbara. And they used asafoetida, mustard, cumin, kumunu, cardamom. But one of the most important seasoning ingredient was a fermented sauce. It was fish-based, and they called it surku. This later on developed in medieval times. It was started to be called murri and started to be cereal-based. Among the livestock kept for meat, the fat-tailed sheep. They were favored, and the tail fat was deemed a delicacy. Herodotus said that their tails are so large that they need carriages in order to drag them behind them. They still are a delicacy, even these days. This is a medieval sheep. You also notice the large tail. This tail is like pure chunk of fat, and it was so delicate and so, they liked it a lot. This is, we still consider it, a good source of solid fat, and here you have a happy butcher. Add to these a rich variety of fish provided by the rivers Tigris and Euphrates and the southern marshes caught by hooks, nets, and lances. This is an Assyrian fisherman. Here you have a modern scene in the southern marshes where their daily lives did not really change much from ancient times. He is using a lance to catch fish. Here you have like a 1930s fisherman using a net, netting fishes, and you notice that the boat he's using is round. This has been commented by Herodotus. He said the boats they use are round. That's what they called it. I mean, it was in English it's coracle, but in Arabic, in Iraq, it's an Iraqi thing. We call it gufwa. Here you have, it was used for transportation, it was used for transporting goods, for transporting people. They were very useful. So if things work, they don't change. They really, you go on. As they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So just use it. Okay, now that's enough for an introduction. Now we come to our first ingredient, and that is the date palm. It's the tree of life. In the Mesopotamian landscape, the date palm, the tallest of the trees and the most generous, was a distinct element. The dates were a dependable source for high-calorie food, fresh and dried. Here you have the dates. Have you had fresh dates? Yeah, they are delicious. I mean, you have them as a fruit when they are fresh, and when they are dried, of course, they store them and they use them year-round. And here you have two images, past and present. The date palm is a tall tree, and in order to pollinate it, in order to harvest the dates, they had to climb up all the way up to the top, and this is how they do it. They climb up. To the right, you see they are doing the same thing, the same. I mean, if it works, don't change it. They were also an essential sweetening agent in the form of date syrup. Sweetmeats with dates were made, such as mursu. This is to the left, you have the date syrup. We make a very nice dip with it with tahini. We mix it with tahini and we use it as a dip. And to the right, you have the mursu. That's the ancient name. Nowadays, we call it madguga because we pound the dates in order to make it. Today, you are going to sample this ancient sweetmeat. It's a semi-solid pudding of dates cooked and mashed with clarified butter and honey. This is how they used to do it in ancient times. This was beyond doubt the mother of all the date sweetmeats so popular in the region throughout the centuries. Wine was fermented from the dates. It was as prevalent as beer was. It continued to be made. We have medieval recipes for the date wine in the 10th century Baghdadi cookbook. I'm going to mention the 10th century Baghdadi cookbook. This is the book. I translated it into English. So it has date wine recipes. And in modern Iraq, it is known in the form of distilled alcohol. This is to the left the distilled wine. And when they mix it with water, it turns milky. And people knew how to distill things from ancient times. You have an illustration and a miniature of distillation from medieval times. This wine in Iraq, we call it lion's milk, because, of course, it looks like milk, but also because of its potency. The earliest evidence of the date palm, a cultivation from 4,000 years BC from Ur in southern Iraq. and its importance to them ever since manifested in their deification of it. It was one of the most ancient symbolic forms of the concept of tree of life. This is a cylinder seal where you see a scene. I mean, people read in this scene the temptation scene. Here you have the snake, you have Adam, you have Eve, and you have the tree. In this case, it happens to be the date palm. The tree of life, which is the sacred tree, which connects heaven, earth, and the underground. Here you have a plaque where you see the beautiful date palm with the dates. And of course, these are pomegranates, also other fruits they loved, and they celebrated. They used them in their celebrations of weddings because they thought they are symbols of fecundity, so for blessing. In their steels, in their in the background, you see the date palms are always there. To the left, there is a scene of refugees from Babylon, and they are being escorted by a guard. He has a stick, but this woman is giving this child some water. But the trees in the background, they tell you where the scene is. To the right, here you have a mother breastfeeding her baby, but there is a tree behind. So what is the connection? I mean, here we see the traditional triad of mother, child, and date that is so famous in the Islamic lore. Because Mary, when she was in labor, she was inspired by God to shake the date palm and feed herself and take care of the baby. There's also in Islamic lore the tradition that dates encourage milk in breastfeeding mothers, and they help mothers with their contractions when they are in labor. So there's always this connection between the date palms, the woman, and the child. And I find it fascinating that this predated all those. Okay, now we leave the date palm and we come to the bread. The harvested, husked, and ground grains were used in many ways. These are the querns they used at the time, and they didn't have this, rotating quern. It was this is called the saddle quern. It moves like this. Such as fermenting barley into beer and making bread with ground barley and wheat. Bread was a food of primary importance to the people, a fact asserted by the name of the Chaldean they gave to bread. They called it akalu. Akalu means to eat, so it's important for you. Bread to them was also one of the markers of civilization. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the prostitute of the temple teaches the wild man Enkidu the way of the civilized, saying, Enkidu, eat bread, Enkidu, the glory of life. Drink wine, Enkidu, the custom of the land. Ancient records show that they knew more than 300 types of bread, types of pastries. They took all kinds of shapes, round, crescents. There were even shapes into breasts. So they improvised with those breads. One of the kinds they did that predated the leavened bread was the thin, unleavened bread. They were baked on hot surfaces, a technique that persisted throughout the Middle Ages and up to this day in rural areas in modern Iraq and surrounding areas. So this is the bread they cooked. It doesn't have to be leavened. They just make it super thin, and they cook it on those heated plates. I brought some of the breads for you, when we have the food to sample those breads. In the medieval sources, it was called roqaq, which means thin. One of the Baghdadi poets, 9th century Ibn Narumi, was so impressed by them that he composed these lines. in those lines, he describes how he saw a baker making those breads, flattening them so quickly into those impressive circles. I remember once a baker by whom I passed. As fast as lightning, ruqaq bread he was flattening, between seeing it turning from a ball in his hand to a large full circle like the moon, took only as much time as an ever-growing circle in water takes when a pebble into it is thrown. It was to them an emblem also of utmost refinement in urban life. There is an anecdote about a Bedouin and his first encounter with this refined bread. He went to a wedding. I mean, of course, when he was invited to a wedding, and when he came back to his village, people surrounded him to tell him about the wonders of the city, what he saw there. So he said, I was before, and when dinner time came, I saw servers bringing folded pieces of a cloth, and they were distributing those, folded pieces of a cloth. He said, I liked this cloth, and as I was about to ask people around me to give me their pieces to make a shirt with it, they started breaking it into pieces and eating it. For leavened bread, you need another kind of oven. It's the tannoor. Baking bread in the domed clay oven provided better conditions for baking flat leavened bread by sticking them to the heated inner walls of the oven. It was also good for baking molded breads. These are the molds that were unearthed. They make, loaves with them, but they are decorated. This is the bread I made. I learned how to make it in the oven using parchment paper and pizza stone, so you are going to have a taste of this bread. And this is the way, women bake. This is the tannoor. And you see how they stick those breads into the inner walls, the heated inner walls of this oven. And you see there is a hole below, next to the floor. This is to, aid circulation of air so that the fire keeps on burning. And the earliest recipe for baking tannoor bread comes from the 10th century Baghdadi cookbook, here, where it is said to be of Nabati origin. Nabati origin means that it is indigenous to the Iraqis. It was called khubz al-ma, which translates to water bread. We still call it water bread, khubz mai, because there is no fat in it. It's just water and flour. Of course, we are talking about flatbreads. Flatbreads for them were quite useful because they used it to scoop food with it. They didn't have the utensils we have now, like knives and forks, to scoop food with it. It was like an edible eating utensil. And it was also useful for, for making the very famous dish, which was called tharid. It was, you break pieces of bread, and you soak them in the broth of the stew, and you eat it with the meat and vegetables. This is what we do. We do it even today. This is the okra stew, but we usually have it with rice, but we like to break those pieces of bread, the flat bread, and we eat it like this. This is called tharid, very famous dish. That was, it has been cooking all these centuries. Now we leave bread, we come to more refined pastries, we come to klecha. Okay, we consider it the Iraqi national cookie. All Iraqis, including myself, and irrespective of region, ethnicity, or religion, we look to the cookie as our national cookie. Although it is so much ingrained in our social and religious lives, nobody seems to know its history, especially its name, klecha. What does it mean? Nobody knows. I found out that klecha belongs to a long line of cookies that take us all the way back to ancient times. Records tell that the Mesopotamians consumed huge amounts of pastries during the religious festivals. Generally, these pastries were called a kuku in Akkadian, from which the Arabic ka'k. Are you familiar with ka'k? So ka'k comes from kuku. And these pastries were made with excellent flour and noble fat. However, during the New Year celebration, heralded by the first new moon around the end of March and beginning of April, that is like the Nowruz when they celebrate the spring, special pastries were baked as offerings to the goddess Ishtar. As daughter of the moon god Sin and sister of the sun god Shamash, Ishtar was at the center of festivities and rituals. Of the cookies baked for her festival were the kuluppu, made by stuffing dough of wheat flour and sesame oil with raisins or dates. Like we do these cookies, we stuff them with dates. They were made round like the moon because that's the symbol of Ishtar. The name kuluppu was derived from the Akkadian kul, which means whole, circle, which I assume to have survived in what we call today klecha. Does it make sense? Kuluppu, klecha, are they close? Apparently, the cookies and their name circulated around the medieval Arab Muslim world. The word kalicha did surface in medieval Arabic cookbooks from Syria and Egypt a couple of times, designating a round cookie cutter. And 14th century Ibn Battuta, in his famous travelogue, mentioned that he was offered kalicha in Khawarizm, a Persian province now in Uzbekistan, and described it as pastries kneaded with ghee. This is supported by a Persian dictionary where kulich is said to designate a small round buttery cake, disk of sun and moon. So you see now the association. As for the medieval recipes, we do have them, but under the guise of the Persian name khushkananaj, literally dry bread, merely descriptive of the cookies of texture. So that's why how sometimes you miss things, during medieval times, it was the fashion to call names by Persian, using Persian words. So the cookies started to be called khushkananaj, so people don't realize that this is the same kuluppu from ancient times. This is what we are baking these days. Now we leave pastries and we come to fish, mazgoof. Many of the cooking methods with which we are familiar today were also used and continue to survive etymologically. For example, for roasting, they use the word shawu. In Arabic, we say shawi. But they also use the word kababu, which is for grilling, on open fire. That's where the word kebab comes from kababu, the ancient, which means to, literally, in Akkadian, it means to scorch. So, for grilling on open fire, kababu, they used specific terms to describe the process. Fish, for instance, was placed on the fire or was touched with fire. For those of us who grew up in Baghdad, such grilling options are quite familiar. Fresh shabut or bunni fish of the carp family is grilled in the mazgoof style along the banks of the river Tigris. By the way, shabut was still in the rivers, in ancient times it was called shabutu. The key for the preparation of mazgoof fish is to open it up from the back. We are used to opening fish from the belly, but the way we do it is to open the fish from the back. This way, you butterfly the fish into two equal parts, equal weight, so that when you put them on the sticks, they don't fall. They keep their balance. So the fishes are butterflied, washed, salted, and then suspended on sticks along with other similarly prepared fishes around campfire. After an hour or so, those fishes will be put on the fire to crisp the skin. That this was indeed an ancient grilling technique has been proven by a relatively recent discovery by an Italian archaeological team in the site of Ur in southern Iraq. They unearthed a plate, they found fish bones in it, and from the scorching marks on the bones, they realized that those fishes were opened from the back. That's the key. If you open it from the back, you are going to cook it masgouf way. Now we leave masgouf. No matter how many things you grill, they don't make a cuisine, right? What makes a cuisine is when you cook with water, with all its varieties, with all the endless possibilities. So that cuisine starts with the stew, with mastering the art of making a stew. And the ancient Mesopotamians, they knew how to do this. And we know this because we have recipes from 1700 BC, Babylonian recipes that have 25 recipes of stews. This is the Babylonian cuneiform tablet. It's a culinary tablet with recipes. Of those 25 recipes, 21 are with meat, 4 meat and vegetables, and 1 vegetarian. So, and they all show, that they have really reached an advanced stage in cooking. They would render a sheep's tail fat. Of course, you remember this. They render it and they, cook the first of all, saute the pieces of meat in it, and then they add water. They add seasonings in different stages. And at the time, in ancient times, they didn't have a black pepper. So in order to add heat, the necessary heat to the dishes, they had to add an ingredient which was kurrath. This leeks, the leaves only, they are hot, peppery hot. They used to grind it with the garlic and add it to the dish just like 5 minutes or so before the fish is done. Let me give you an example of one of the recipes. It is called tuhi stew, which is red beet stew. This is the recipe. Leg meat is used. You prepare the water, you add fat, you sear, you add salt, beer, onion, arugula, coriander, scallion, cumin, and beets, and you crush leeks and garlic. You sprinkle coriander from the storage on top. Do you understand what's this coriander on storage? It means dried storage. That's the way they want to convey the idea that it's not fresh. It is dried. You add kurrath, that is the leaf leeks, and the fresh coriander. So that was the recipe. I have tried this recipe several times with the students at Harvard University, and they liked it. So, you can cook it. The recipe is available. I see also this, I see something interesting in this recipe also. It's the stew made with beets. It reminds one of the borscht recipe, the beets recipe. And I also, the Baghdadi Jews, they call them Babylonian Jews, they used to, cook their dishes, their stews with beets. They make them red with beets. So I see this connection between the Babylonian recipes and the Jewish ways of dealing with the beets. So when we compare the Babylonian recipes to what we know of medieval cuisine, as evidenced in the extant Baghdadi cookbook, here you have the stews are also ubiquitous in medieval times. and present-day culinary practices, they suggest that the Babylonian stews represent an early stage of a long tradition that's still dominant in Iraqi cuisine. Of course, not everything remained. They used to cook, they used to use blood, pork, which, Muslims and Jews discontinued. And they used to mix meat with dairy, which was also discontinued. But and also something else that happened to the cooking in the region that changed the stews. It is the introduction of tomatoes. This new word. It's a fruit, right? Before the tomatoes, they used to color their stews with saffron. Add acidity to it by adding juices of fruits, different kinds of fruits, and thickening the stews by adding crumbs, flour, etc. But if you have the tomato, you don't need all these things. The tomato would add all these things. In addition to the umami taste, that flavor that it adds to the dish. They used the fermented sauce, which has this umami flavor. We no longer use these sauces, fermented sauces, because the tomato is doing it this all. Providing all these things. Now we have to the counterfeit dishes, muzawwarat. One of the dishes I made today is the dolma, which is the stuffed vegetables. And it doesn't have meat. And we call it dolma bilzet. In Turkish, it's called yalanci dolma, which means fake. So why is it fake? Because it doesn't have meat. So, that's why they call it. We, in our culture, we value meat so much that we think if a dish doesn't have meat, it's not real food. It's fake. But those dishes were useful for Christians for Lent. That's why they developed it. In Iraq, for example, in Mosul, this vegetarian dolma is quite popular during Lent because it doesn't have meat, and it provides them with all the nutrients, and But those dishes, those meatless dishes, were not the invention of the new cooks. They started much earlier. The practice of preparing meatless dishes for Lent fasting developed centuries ago. In fact, by the 10th century. The vegetarian dishes for Lent have already been established. We have a whole chapter for meatless dishes for Christians, for Lent. Those vegetarian dishes, they were called muzawwarat, which means counterfeit dishes, the same as fake. But they were also, they thought that those are also suitable for sick people, convalescents. They need lighter dishes, so they were also, so they were muzawwarat, were for the sick and for Lent. But this, for meat-loving people, of course, this did not sit well. How can you have meat, a dish without meat? So once a sick poet protested. He said, "How can muzawwara my nourishment be? Eating muzawwara is a falsity. Vinegar and the trifling vegetable dishes are not for me. Let the doctor get out of my way. Say in doctors and medicine faith has gone astray. Give me, where's kebab? Where are the fried dishes? The succulent roasts and the spiced meat, bring them on." Now we come to a technique, the stuffed and the rolled. The Iraqi cuisine is famous. Our cuisine is famous for its elaborate, time-consuming dishes where we stuff and roll and we sit for hours doing all these things. Why do we do them? How did they start? How did they evolve? The cuisine of intrigue, was inspired. I was inspired by a story I heard. It's like an anecdote that my parents used to tell us, and for fun. They said a villager went to the city. He had some money, So he went to a restaurant owner and he said, give me the best of your dishes. So the restaurant, he brought him a whole plateful of dolma, those stuffed vegetables. And he looked at it, he said, no, I'm not eating it. He said, why? This is the best dish we have. This is delicious. He said, no, I'm not eating it. If there is no deceit in doing this, so why is it so stuffed and rolled and, and hidden like this, if there's no deceit involved in making it? So we stuff dishes. Of course, there's an element of surprise in the dish. You hide it, you roll it. There is something inside. The eater will, when he eats it, he will realize that there is something else. And there's, of course, the element of surprise and the pride on the part of the cook. We see this in one of the Babylonian tablets. There are 3 tablets, one with the stew and one with this dish, which has, which shows some intrigue, cuisine of intrigue. The third one was destroyed. It was damaged, so they didn't read much of it. These are the dishes that we cook, that we spend hours doing. This is the bulgur dough. We make thin discs with it. And in Mosul, in northern Iraq, this is famous because this is where bulgur, where grains, wheat grows abundantly. They use a special gadget so that they can lift them, drop them into water and lift them without breaking them. This is another kind of stuffed dish that we hide something inside. There's this new word, vegetable, the potato. So whatever we see, we just stuff it and hide it. So this is the cuneiform tablet where you have a bird pie. It's an elaborate dish where you have a double crusted pie, where you have after they prepare the crust, the top and the other part, they put cooked birds, small birds, cooked in rich sauce, enriched with milk, and then they put the birds in this like a edible dish. They cover it and they send it to the table. So when they open it up, they will see this kind of thing and they will be surprised. In medieval times, we have a lot of dishes that are called covered, the hidden, the shrouded, etc. Now, I conclude with another aspect of food, which is the spirit in which it is conducted. Hospitality, it's offered generously and enjoyed graciously. And this has been, without dispute, of course, the landmark of all, Middle Eastern, of the whole Middle East in food culture. From the depth of ancient Mesopotamia, we hear the hostess cautioning, "Let it be plentiful, lest there be too little. Let it be more than enough, lest it has to be added to. Let it be boiling hot, let it get cold." So this is, this is the way you have to offer food to your guests. This is the bird pie, cooked by a team. These are medieval people, illustration. This is the host serving his guests. As a hospitable host, he shouldn't eat until he satisfies the needs of his guests. Here you have people at a wedding, and you see the folded bread, pieces of bread, discs all around because to them, offering the more bread you offer, the more hospitable you are considered. They are having fun in an orchard. And they are also entertaining at a tavern where there's dancing, there's drinking. But give it to the, to the Mesopotamians to enjoy, to know how to enjoy. They are the ones who, who came up with the carpe diem concept. So Siduri's advice to Gilgamesh, she said, eat and drink your fill, Gilgamesh, and celebrate day and night. Make every day a festival, day and night, dance and play. So you have to seize the chance before, you have to seize the day before it is too late. There are scenes, they used to say that, they said that when they drank, they clanked their glasses for joy, expressed joy. There is a party, women's party. And what are parties without dancing and, without singing and dancing? Now, sharing meals. I've been talking about sharing meals, but sharing meals literally because they shared the same dishes, just a communal dish, a large dish, and 10 people would eat from the dish. This, of course, gave rise to a whole set of rituals that involved washing the hands before and after the meals. This inspired one of the engineers in Iraq, 12th century, to invent the hand washing machine. So this is the... And of course, what are feasts without, conversations? It's not only food, it's about other things. So dinner conversations were encouraged. As the medieval poet once said, lucky is the one treated to food and conversation, for table talk is part of hospitality. And of course, conversation is urged. People have to engage in lively conversations. One of the sayings, sit at dinner tables as long as you can and converse to your heart's desire, for these are the bonus times of your lives. So.
I anticipate people want to eat, but maybe we can just do just one quick question,
okay.
And then we have the chance to talk more upstairs. We're so lucky.
Okay, yeah, okay. So.
What is a noble fat?
Oh, noble fat is good quality fat.
Oh, okay.
Like if it is sesame oil, it has to be, first grade sesame oil,
But it could
oil.
be an animal product or
I think animals with ghee, clarified butter. Yeah, it could be clarified butter, but it should be, excellent quality.
Well, let's continue the conversation upstairs
Okay.
over food and drink. Please join us. I'll lead the way up to the reception upstairs, and we can taste many of the things that
Okay.
Nawal has shared tonight. Thank you again.